me home to the place. I'm leaving on a jet plane, don't know when
She came home to a place she'd never been before. The lyrics echo over the field, but this wasn't a concert. It was October 1997, and thousands stood in silence at Coors Field in Denver, Colorado. Not for a game, not for a celebration, but for a man who had captured their hearts with every word he sang. And as the crowd swayed in unison to Take Me Home, Country Roads, something unforgettable happened. Something that still haunts fans to this day. What was it about this moment, this man, that made it feel like America was saying goodbye to more than just a singer? Keep watching until the end to uncover the heartbreaking truth behind John Denver's final years and the untold battles he faced behind the scenes. You might think you know his story, but do you really? To most of the world, John Denver was the cheerful guy with the mop-top hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice like fresh mountain air. His songs were filled with sunshine, mountains, and wide-open roads, a comforting soundtrack to a simpler time. But behind that warm smile and those beloved melodies lived a man far more complex than most ever realized. He wasn't just a performer. He was a trailblazer, an environmentalist before it was trendy, and one of the first American artists to perform in communist China, spreading music across boundaries where words alone often failed. Why would a man who seemed to have it all, a booming career, millions of fans, and a heart full of compassion, be silently drowning in battles no one could see? You'll want to stick around for the full story, because what's coming will shift everything you thought you knew about the man who gave the world Rocky Mountain High. Long before he filled arenas with songs about rivers, stars, and country roads, Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. was just a boy growing up under the weight of jet engines and military discipline. Born on December 31st, 1943, in Roswell, New Mexico, he was the son of a U.S. Air Force pilot, Colonel Henry Dutch Deutschendorf Sr., a man known for his strictness and silence. Military bases were their neighborhoods, and moving every few years was normal. For young John, it meant starting over again and again, never staying long enough to build roots. Yet something beautiful grew out of that restlessness. From those endless road trips and new landscapes came a deep love for America's natural beauty. From his father's love of aviation, a dream of flying, and from the loneliness of constantly saying goodbye, a yearning for connection that would one day pour out through music. At just 11 years old, John's grandmother handed him a Gibson acoustic guitar. That gift lit a fire. While other kids played sports, John huddled in his room, teaching himself chords, mimicking folk legends like Pete Seeger, the Kingston Trio, and Glenn Campbell. But here's a question that might surprise you. How did a quiet, shy military kid with no permanent hometown end up becoming the voice of an entire generation's longing for home? Stay with us, because the answer is in the music. And the music came from a place much deeper than most ever knew. By the time John hit his teen years in Fort Worth, Texas, his life was already diverging from his father's path. He joined a boy choir, started performing at local clubs, and quietly began building the foundations of a music career, while still technically studying architecture at Texas Tech University in 1961. But John Denver wasn't made for blueprints and lecture halls. His true education came on makeshift stages and smoky cafes in front of small crowds who didn't yet realize they were witnessing the early glow of something extraordinary. He formed a group called the Alpine Trio, then later joined the more established Mitchell Trio, replacing founding member Chad Mitchell. That's when doors really started to open. It was during this transformative period that Henry John Deutschendorf Jr. became John Denver, not just as a stage name, but as a declaration of identity. Inspired by the Colorado capital he would one day immortalize in song, Denver reflected who he was becoming: a voice of the mountains, a child of the wind, a man in search of something higher. And yet, while most artists of his time were singing about revolution and rage, Denver was doing something different. He was singing about home, about belonging, about the quiet beauty of the earth. But what made those simple messages so powerful, so universal, that even people on the other side of the world would weep to his lyrics? The next chapter in his life would answer that. Stay with us. The late 1960s marked the moment when John Denver stepped from the shadows into the spotlight. After sharpening his skills in group settings, he made the bold decision to go solo in 1969, a move that would change everything. That same year, Denver wrote a gentle, heartfelt tune titled "Leaving on a Jet Plane."
'Cause I'm leaving on a jet plane, don't know when
Though his version didn't top the charts, when Peter, Paul, and Mary recorded it, the song became their first and only #1 hit. That single track catapulted Denver into the industry's inner circles. Suddenly, this shy man with the crystal-clear tenor and disarming sincerity was on everyone's radar. But even that success didn't prepare the world for what came next. In 1971, while working with Bill Danoff and Taffy Nivert, he helped complete a song about West Virginia, a place he'd never even visited. Yet somehow, when John sang the words to "Take Me Home, Country Roads,"
country roads take me home to the place.
it felt like he'd lived there his entire life. The song soared to #2 on the Billboard charts and became a cultural landmark. And from that point on, John Denver wasn't just a singer, he was a symbol. But how does a song about a place you've never seen become an anthem for people everywhere? What is it about Denver's voice that made even strangers feel like they were finally home? Watch until the end. You'll understand. From 1972 to 1974, Denver released a string of hits that seemed unstoppable. Rocky Mountain High, 1972, Sunshine on My Shoulders, 1973, Annie's Song, 1974, Thank God I'm a Country Boy, 1974. Each one was more than a melody. It was a moment, a message, a mirror held up to the soul of America. His songs weren't flashy or rebellious. They were hopeful, heartfelt, and healing. In an era where politics and protests filled the airwaves, Denver gave people something they desperately craved: peace, beauty, and belonging. Television embraced him. His appearances on The Tonight Show and his wildly popular specials brought his charisma into living rooms across the country. His look, granny glasses, embroidered shirts, and that boyish grin, became iconic. By 1974, he was one of the top-selling artists in the world, with platinum albums and sold-out tours across continents. But what made John Denver truly stand apart? He didn't just entertain, he educated, inspired, and challenged. He used his fame to spotlight environmental issues, urging audiences to reconnect with the earth. But behind the scenes, a very different story was starting to unfold, one that would slowly unravel everything he had built. What was going wrong? And why didn't the world see it coming? Keep watching. The answers are coming. By the mid to late 1970s, John Denver had become more than a music star. He was a movement. He won the Country Music Association's Entertainer of the Year, earned multiple Grammy nominations, and collaborated with the Muppets, delighting millions. He toured the Soviet Union, helped launch the Windstar Foundation, and worked closely with UNICEF and the Hunger Project, using music as a bridge between cultures and ideologies. He even had ambitions to fly into space and was seriously considered for a NASA civilian spaceflight. But beneath the surface of his humanitarian image, personal fault lines were beginning to crack. The pressures of fame, endless travel, and growing political involvement strained his marriage to Annie Martell, the muse behind Annie's song. By the end of the decade, the once idyllic romance was beginning to fray. Critics, too, began to circle. Some questioned the authenticity of his wholesome persona. Others felt his activism alienated more traditional fans. And still, through it all, John Denver kept performing, writing, and dreaming. But could even a man who sang about peace survive the storms of his own life? Could the dreamer keep believing when his world began to crumble? We're getting closer to the part no one talks about. Don't turn away now. The 1980s brought seismic changes, not just in music, but in John Denver's personal life. In 1982, his marriage to Annie ended in a bitter divorce. The once soft-spoken singer shocked fans when he reportedly used a chainsaw to cut their bed in half, a haunting image that shattered the public's image of the gentle mountain man. Then came the battles with alcohol. Multiple DUI arrests between the 1980s and early 1990s put his once pristine reputation on shaky ground. The most infamous crash occurred in 1993 when he drove his Porsche off the road near his Aspen home. Professionally, things weren't any easier. As new wave and synth pop dominated the airwaves, Denver's brand of folk country was labeled outdated. Sales fell. His longtime label, RCA Records, dropped him in 1986. His second marriage to Cassandra Delaney gave him a brief respite, but that too ended in divorce by 1993, complete with painful custody battles over their daughter, Jessie Bell. And then there was the IRS investigation. Accusations of tax evasion in the early 90s cast yet another shadow over his name. Through it all, he kept singing, kept fighting, kept hoping. But how much pain can a single soul carry? And how long can you pretend to be okay when you're falling apart inside? Let's keep going. By the 1990s, John Denver had accepted that his time at the top of the charts was over, but he hadn't stopped making music, not even close. He performed nearly 100 shows a year, found new fan bases in Asia, and leaned even harder into environmental activism. He was no longer chasing commercial success. He was chasing meaning, peace, and healing. His love of flying, always in his blood, grew stronger too. He became an accomplished pilot with over 2,700 flight hours, often flying himself to events and appearances. But then came the flight that ended it all. On October 12, 1997, John Denver's experimental Rutan Long EZ aircraft crashed into Monterey Bay, California. He was just 53 years old. At the time of his death, he had been working on a memoir, planning new environmental projects, and finally finding moments of quiet joy. His death was sudden, unthinkable, and for many, it felt like losing a friend they had never met, but always known. How does a man like that die in silence when his voice had meant so much to so many? Thousands came to his memorials. Tributes poured in from across the globe. But the real tribute? His music still plays, loud, proud, and eternal. Today, Take Me Home, Country Roads is more than a song. It's a memory, a homecoming, a feeling. John Denver's legacy isn't just in what he sang, it's in what he believed, in the power of nature, in the beauty of simplicity, in the strength of kindness, and in the right to dream, even when the world says no. He was a dreamer, yes, but also a fighter, a man who battled demons, carried burdens, and still managed to fill the world with light. So here's the question that lingers as his voice echoes through the mountains. What would John Denver be fighting for if he were still with us today? What new songs would he sing, and what truths would he finally tell? Maybe we'll never know. But if you've watched this far, you already understand the answer in your heart.